Hey everyone, Derek here. In this one, I want to show you how we can do automatic code remediation by using Datadog, Python, and WayScript. What we'll do is monitor our application using Datadog and then perform EC2 actions on our instances. Let's get started. Starting out, I'm going to gloss over a little bit of setup to get this working, but don't worry if you need help on any of these steps. We'll have written documentation linked below that you can follow along completely with. In this one, all I have is an EC2 instance already up and running, and we can view that instance by going to our AWS console and clicking on EC2. Once this loads, we should see that we have one instance running, and we have access to this instance ID. This is how we can use the Boto3 API to interact with this instance. Also in AWS, we need to make sure that we have a user who is capable of editing different EC2 actions. In this, you see I have attached Amazon EC2 full access to this policy. And that just means that I can interact with that Boto3 API and do any actions involving EC2. Once we have these, we can go over to Datadog and make sure that we have monitors set up to where whatever event we want to monitor, we can do an action on WayScript using it. Great, so we've talked through our setup, and like I said, there's a full documentation down below that will help you out in any of those steps if you get stuck. Now let's talk about why we might want to use this. Well, there's a bunch of reasons. We can automatically manage our EC2 instances using Datadog events. We can monitor our application, and depending on a type of event that happens to our app, we can automatically do code remediation using Python and WayScript. This is cool because you could imagine events like too much traffic, then increase instances, or too little traffic, we're wasting instance space, decrease instance. In this video, we'll cover a few of those use cases where we can automatically do code remediation. Let's start off by just getting information from our EC2 instance. Starting out, let's go into our Python step, and then we need to import the Boto3 library, and then also from botocore.exceptions, we'll import client error. Now that we have these in our Python step, we need to go ahead and build a client. That way we can use it to access AWS resources. We can say something like build client, and what this will be a function. And since we're using EC2, let's say EC2 will be equal to boto3.client, where the resource we'll use is EC2. We'll specify a region name. For me, I'll be using US East 2. And then we have two credential fields. So let me go ahead and copy those and paste those over. So what these are the credentials that we can get from the IAM user management on AWS. And what we want to do with these is use the WayScript secrets manager. So we can go over here to secrets and then create two secrets of key ID and secret key. These are the values from the IAM access. And what I'll do is go back over and drag these environment variables in. So we have a key ID and then a secret key. Once we have those, we just need a return. So we'll return EC2. And this build client function is what we'll call whenever we want to do some type of action using EC2. So we have our client built. Now let's see how we can get information from both a Datadog alert and an EC2 instance. Going back to our tree, we can pull in the Datadog trigger and turn it on. Now anytime we get an event, we should see that event populate down here in the variables panel. Then to get information from our EC2 instance, let's create a second function. This time I'll just copy a function over, and all this code is on GitHub. So if you just want to view it there, that will be linked down below in the description as well. So our EC2 info we'll call build client, and then we have a client method of describe instances. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So we'll do something like print and then EC2 info. Whenever we execute that, we see that we get a ton of information down here about the instances I have on my account. Awesome. Now let's talk about how we can start pairing Datadog with our EC2 instances. Let's go ahead and set up an alert so whenever we have high traffic on our application, let's receive a monitor alert that will trigger our code here. So once this trigger fires, our Python code will execute. And now let's go ahead and define some actions. The first thing we'll need is to check for an instance and see if it's running or not running. That way, once we know that, we can either turn it on or off depending on what we need. I'll copy over a function to do just that. And I'm calling this one check instance state, where we pass it an instance ID. Then we'll check the state, and then we'll pull out the state. Our return is either running or not running. Then, if we have high traffic, we may want to turn an off instance on. So I'll copy another function of turning an instance on using the Boto3 library, and I'll paste that in. So this time we have a function called turn instance on, taking that same instance ID, and then if it's off, then we turn it on. If it is already on, then we get back a return of instance already running. Great, so we have our function set up. Now let's go ahead and mock a Datadog alert. That way we can see this event struct populate. We'll go back to our tree view, and I'll send a mock request to our Datadog trigger. Sending that request, which should hopefully fire or monitor on Datadog, we'll get back a response in our event struct letting us know the title of the event. In this case, I know exactly what it'll be, and the title will be high traffic, and therefore we could either add a new instance or turn an off instance on. We'll do the latter, and I'll show you how we can turn an off instance on. We see it populates, and now we have the struct value down here with this title high traffic. This title will be our conditional for how we turn that instance on, and we could say something in our Python code that looks like this. So we could have our event title will be equal to variables event, and then we could say event title equals event title dot get, and then we'll get that title. So if we were to print event title, we will execute this, and we should get back high traffic, which we do. Now we could say something like if high traffic in event title, then we could turn our instance on. To do that, we could say instance ID and then pass in an ID, and then we'll say instance ID is equal to that value. Then, since we already have our function turn instance on, we'll just say turn instance on, and then we'll pass in that instance ID. In our case, we should get back a failure or instance already running because this instance is already on. But you could imagine that this comes from a list of instances, and then you could loop over them, finding an off instance and then turning that one on. We'll go ahead and add a print onto this so we can see the response of our function. Now in our log, we see instance is already running. Now let's say that we have a Datadog alert that gives us low traffic. So we could do a turn instance off function. I'll copy this and paste it into our editor. Pasting it in, we see it's the exact opposite of turn instance on. It checks to see if the instance is running, and if it is, it will turn it off. And then we get back a confirmation. So let's say something like if low traffic in event title, then we could say instance ID. We'll use that same instance ID for this one. We'll copy it, paste it, and then we can say print turn instance off, and then pass in that instance ID. Now going through and mocking a low traffic event through Datadog, we should see our code execute, and then a response of turning that instance off because we have low traffic and no longer need it. We'll give it a few seconds for the event to come through, and we see that it just did. So now we should get back a response of none, meaning that our instance turned off. We'll go back and view our instances, and we can see that previously it was running, and now we should get back an instance state of none of stopped. This is the basis of a lot of cool techniques that we can do using EC2 and Datadog. We'll look at a few more examples just to show you what's possible. Now let's create another function called reboot instances. We'll copy this function and I'll paste it in over here. So this takes an instance ID the same way how we had before and reboots it. So if there's an issue, depending on your alert, you can reboot a defective instance. With the Boto 3 API, the possibilities are endless, and there's all sorts of cool techniques that you can do with your Datadog alerts and your Boto 3 Python step in your WayScript program. If you have any questions or comments about this script, please let us know. If you have any ideas on what we could do next, please let us know that too. Until next time.